Players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most revered in the history of Magic the Gathering. Blood Moon, Force of Will, Brainstorm, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy in the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind BoshNRoll on YouTube, Thraben University, and theepicstorm.com. This episode is sponsored by 3-for-1 Trading and Sparks Law Practice.
Hello, and welcome to episode 136 of the Eternal Glory podcast. Is banning Psychic Frog enough? We've already recorded 30 minutes of introductions and banter for the week, available in our supporter-exclusive pre-show. Check out patreon.com/eternalglory to gain access, or join as a YouTube member for the same content on YouTube instead. As always, I'm Phil Gallagher, aka ThrabenU.
I'm Brian Coval, also known as BoshNRoll.
And I'm Brian Cook of the Epic Storm.
Shout out to our new YouTube members and patrons who will enjoy that pre-show this week. We've got The Nomad, Bryce B, Victor R, Will A, and Gavin C joining our group of folks who will hear about Phil and I's drag queen experience in Las Vegas last weekend, among other things.
Also, why Consigned Memory is complete bullshit.
True.
This episode is brought to you by Sparks Law, a business transactional law firm owned by Eternal Magic community member Jonathan Sparks. If you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or gig worker looking to start your own company, Sparks Law can help with partnership agreements, contract reviews, intellectual property protection, or any other business legal questions. If you want to shape your business strategy with a fellow Eternal gamer, reach out via email to jsparks, that's JSPARKS, at sparkslawpractice.com, or call 470-268-5234.
And if you would like to advertise to over 10,000 plus Eternal gamers every single episode, reach out to us. We're always accepting new sponsors. On our last episode, we mentioned that we had a known issue with Spotify users not receiving our episodes. That has been fixed. Our RSS feed is now back and up and working, so you should be able to hear us on all platforms.
Cool. So let's start with just some results from Vegas. There were two big legacy events there, and let's just paint a picture of the metagame before we get into our thoughts on Reanimator and Psychic Frog specifically. I did compete in both of these events. I ate poop in both of them, and I was playing Reanimator in both of them as well. And I'll talk about that experience down in the later parts of the episode as well. The first event was the Friday Legacy Cup, 123 players, and the top 8 in order. So the winner was Naya Depths. That deck had Moloch, 2 Legolas's Quick Reflexes, and then Toxicrene in the sideboard, among exciting things. Second place, a deck I'm very excited about, Esper Stoneblade, 4 Frog, 4 Stoneforge Mystic, 2 Pre-War Formalware that can loop the Frog, and then Batterskull and Cauldra as threats. Nadu Breakfast in third, Dimir Froginator in fourth, Blue-White Dreadnought, no Curie, nothing special, nothing new. It looks like the list looked 4 weeks ago. Grixis Control in 6, very excited about that. Baleful Strix, Psychic Frog, Snapcasters, and 1 Overlord of the Baelmerk. And then another Dimir Froginator in 7th, and Jeskai Stoneblade in 8th.
All right, I'm gonna read that one, because that is one, if you're not like super tuned into Legacy, you might not have seen it. So, this is 3 colorless, black, for an enchantment creature avatar horror that is a 5/5 with impending 5. So you can cast it for 1 colorless and a black for its impending costs, and then it enters with 5 time counters on it and isn't a creature until the last one is removed. At the beginning of your end step, you remove a time counter from it. When it enters or attacks, you mill 4 cards, and then you may return a non-avatar creature card or a planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is kind of like a Once Upon a Time style card that you can cast, get a little bit of selection early on, and then it turns into a 5/5 that potentially has some card advantage attached to it later.
Yeah, I've actually been playing a lot of this card lately, weirdly enough, because I built an Asmo food Insidious Roots deck for the channel recently, where Overlord was an all-star. I added it to my Tatsunari Toad Rider EDH deck, and it got a lot of mileage this past weekend in Vegas playing some casual EDH. This card is very cool. I don't know if it belongs in Legacy Grixis control, but oh boy, am I excited to see it.
I've had it played against me in Legacy a number of times now, but there was a part that I only realized recently. So typically people will play this, they'll get back a Psychic Frog, Orcish Bowmasters, whatever. So I was like, okay, you get a creature back that you mill. No, it's any creature that comes back. So I had Thoughtseize to Lavinia, and then my Esper opponent played the Overlord of the Baelmerk, got back to Lavinia, and I was like, oh, great, they didn't mill any creatures, no extra value here. And then my eyes bugged out when they got back to Lavinia. I was like, what? I didn't realize that it was just any creature. So keep that in mind. It's not only creatures that they mill.
Yeah, that is something that I had to understand too when I first started playing with the card, because cards like Gyruda and other things where you only get back something that happened just now, like Takenuma is another example of a played card where that matters. Yeah, it's anything out of the graveyard.
Fuck Takenuma. That card sucks.
Wow, Phil, with Takenuma catching strays here.
It deserves it. It knows what it did. It's worse than a fucking basic swamp.
My goodness. All right. Well, Phil's on record hating Takenuma. That was not on our agenda tonight.
Okay, I do want to loop back to one other card, though. What do you all think of this Toxicrene in the sideboard of the Dark Depths deck? Conceptually, it's there as a Green Sun bullet. Is this actually good? Because you would be doing that as a Green Sun bullet at 5 mana in your deck that does not actually have all that much mana acceleration. Like, this deck isn't even maxed out on Mox Diamonds. It's playing 3 Mox Diamonds. This feels weird to me.
You want to remind us all what Toxicrene does for this conversation?
Yeah, so it's 3 colorless and a green for a 2/4 Reach Death Toucher. All lands have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and lose all other abilities. So on the surface, this exists to, in theory, shut off things like Maze of Ith, Glacial Chasm, but since it produces mana of any color, this is going to shut off the various colorless producing lands of Eldrazi.
So this does actually work as Blood Moon versus Eldrazi, but not against anyone else. And I think in the context of Naya Depths, a deck that is trying to make a specific thing happen, if they are able to turn off Wasteland, but I mean, Dark Depths doesn't work with this under it either. You could do the trick where you get your Toxicrene, play Dark Depths. It's just, it doesn't have counters on it. Then if Toxicrene ever dies, there's a 20/20. This might just be able to get over the hump versus like 12 post or actual lands and not really be intended as a solution to Eldrazi. I don't know. I didn't design this deck. I'd never play it, but it does seem like a very expensive way to do that in a deck that's already built around Wasteland.
I think it's a lot better in decks like Nadu, the dedicated Nadu decks that play Llanowar Elves and all those things, because you can accelerate it into it in a more meaningful way. I wouldn't recommend it in something like Nadu Breakfast where you don't even play Green Sun Zenith, but the dedicated Nadu decks, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree. It makes more sense there. That's also a deck that's not trying to do cool stuff with its own lands. Like Toxicrene turning off your own Dark Depths and Wastelands and Karakas and everything seems strange. One thing I really want to hit on is 2 different builds of Stoneblade in this top 8. And I've been saying on my channel and in my content and on previous episodes of the pod and everything, I've been impressed with Stoneblade lately, especially Stoneblade decks that can also play Psychic Frog, which, you know, maybe that's an eye roll. Like, obviously, any shell Psychic Frog is better. But one of these lists is Jeskai. And unfortunately, due to a melee.gg error, there's no deck list for the Jeskai one. It's actually listed as being played by one Anurag Das, who was not enrolled in the tournament. It was just like a weird thing. I don't know. But I really like jamming over and over again in this format in a way that I will get the cards back. Where Psychic Frog, if it sticks, you get the cards back. Stoneforge immediately pays you out with whatever you tutor for. And just having 8 things to do on turn 2 instead of 4 really gets the game going in a way that I'm excited about. And I've been impressed by Stoneblade lately, and 2 different lists pulling up in a 123 player tournament is information that appeals to me.
Well, we talked about it in the last episode about playing control decks that are able to turn the corner, and Stoneblade is the definition of that, right? Like you go all the way back to the heyday of the SCG era. You had all of these Stoneblade mirrors because they were capable of winning rounds, and then Miracles came along and things kind of shifted a little bit. But I've been playing so much Legacy in my free time, just trying to prepare for Eternal Weekend, and I get paired into a lot of Jeskai decks where at some point I asked myself, is it worth it for me to sit here for 15 minutes until they find Fourth Aerlingus? Like, do I want to waste the next hour of my life or should I concede? And if this was Eternal Weekend, I'd probably make them find the Fourth Aerlingus and run down the clock and all that sort of thing. But with Esper Stoneblade, there's none of that. Like, you just go get your Cauldra or, you pump your Psychic Frog a couple of times. So I like the ability to turn on a dime. So it makes a lot of sense.
And this Esper build has 2 copies of pre-war formalware in it, which I'm sure Phil is excited about. And if you play Stoneforge Mystic and tutor formalware, they can't kill your Stoneforge Mystic. Then you just cast formalware, it's back, and then it's bigger, and Caldra's coming with it. And if they kill or counter an early frog, the formalwares are in there. You could even functionally Stoneforge Mystic for Psychic Frog in those mid-game situations where there's one in the graveyard already. It's just very powerful, very interesting innovation to go deep on that. Like, not just one, but there are 2.
So if we look how the format's constructed, there is a push to move away from Lightning Bolt because Lightning Bolt doesn't answer Psychic Frog. And I said push there, trying to be a little bit punny, because Fatal Push became the premier removal spell for Legacy because it does answer Psychic Frog. Well, if Fatal Push is the removal spell and not Swords to Plowshares, pre-war Formalware gets a lot better. So if you were trying to combat this Esper Stoneblade deck, Swords to Plowshares makes a lot of sense, but I don't know if there's a reason that there would be a shift to play Swords over, Fatal Push or other removal spells. Like, what is your justification for going white right now?
I think white is insane right now because white hits everything, and like the red and black removal is often missing stuff. Like Metamorphosis Fanatic as a 4/4 dodges Lightning Bolt and then also dodges Fatal Push because it's a 6-mana card on the surface. I think for control mages, looking into having white removal for Eternal Weekend is probably a good idea. And I think Stoneforge Mystic pre-war formalware is a part of that. So there's this really insidious play pattern that can happen where you already start with a Cauldra in your hand, and then you play Stoneforge Mystic, you fetch pre-war formalware, and your opponent gets printed in their head, I don't want to send that Stoneforge to the graveyard, so they let you untap with it, and then bam, 5/5, go.
Yeah, for sure.
And that is a horrifying thing to be on the other side of, where you just get got by dodging a play pattern that you should be avoiding.
And this deck is emblematic of something that we see all the time. It's been happening since the mid-90s, where a tempo-oriented deck is the best thing in the format. Like the Dimir Tempo or Dimir Reanimator, which has a bunch of tempo components. One of the solutions to those metagames, going all the way back to the Miracle Grow days, is up your curve, put some bigger creatures in, and splash white for Swords to Plowshares. That was one of the things that happened during Treasure Cruise. It was one of the things that happened during Dreadhorde Arcanist. Go back through Legacy's history. When a tempo deck is the best deck, there is another build of that deck splashing white and going a little bigger. And here we are with a Psychic Frog deck that instead of Nethergoyf is playing Stoneforge Mystic, instead of Fatal Push is playing Swords to Plowshares. And this is just that pattern repeating itself. It's proven to be effective in metagames like this one.
If you want to go back, we did an episode that's actually one of our most listened to episodes on YouTube. It's called The Midrange Wars, where you can hear more about this theory of going larger to get over the tempo decks and etc. So definitely go check that out. It's a popular listen for us.
And the word midrange is really important here. I wasn't planning to talk this much about Stoneblade, but I'm excited it's happening. These are mid-range decks, and the point of a mid-range deck is that it can be a control deck versus aggro, and it can be an aggro deck versus control. And generally, mid-range decks just end up kind of stuck in the middle and not as good as either side at doing the thing. But I think control decks right now are pretty bad, and the tempo decks are really good. And then Nadu existing as sort of a mid-range combo option. If you could keep up with all of that, Like, there is no extreme control deck right now. I think those Jeskai decks that Brian alluded to a minute ago are actually just bad. The ones that are playing like 2/4 Aerlingus and the whole 75 to win a game with. I don't think those decks are good. I don't think they close. I don't even think they're that good at controlling the things that they are trying to control. And I mean, Beanstalk still kicking around. I wouldn't really want to play against Beanstalk with Esper Stoneblade. I don't think that's a deck that could actually grind you into the dust going long. But if there's not a well-represented control metagame in the decks you expect to see, it might as well be the mid-range deck.
Why don't we talk about the original art event? There's somebody in the top 8 of that event where I was absolutely stoked to see their face in the top 8 picture. Shout out to Jeremy from Iron Deck, supporter of all 3 of us, and just genuinely great guy. So happy for Jeremy.
Yep, we're all Jeremy and Iron Deck fans, and he finished 8th in this tournament with Sneak and Show. He started out 5-0, got paired down in round 6, lost, and then was able to draw in comfortably at 8th. He did lose in the top 8, but really happy to see him making a run. This tournament's top 8 in order, the winner was Nadu Elves with Natural Order. I think this innovation is really important because I played the Nadu Elves deck, and this is one with like Court of Calling and trying to very quickly assemble Wirewood Symbiote, Quirion Ranger nonsense with Nadu. And I thought that deck sucked because it was basically just 2010 Mirror Entity Elves, which is dead for a reason. There's too many moving parts. If things go wrong, you have no way to catch up. And the thing that killed Mirror Entity Elves back in the day was the printing of Craterhoof Behemoth in 2012. And then Natural Order was added to the shell. And we didn't need to do all that other dumb shit anymore. And we could just cast Natural Order and hoof people. And this list of Nadu Elves has Natural Order and Craterhoof Behemoth in it. They have reinvented the wheel. Once again, time is a flat circle. Just like tempo decks being beaten by a white splash for Swords to Plowshares and bigger creatures, Elves being innovated by adding Natural Order Craterhoof Behemoth. We found it again.
I love that, like, our audience can't see your face, but you lit up with joy talking about this, and it warms my heart because, Brian, when I met you, you were the Elves guy. We were in similar circles, and we would see each other at Jupiter Games events, and in my head for years, you were the guy that played Elves. And a lot of the listeners probably know you as, Brian Coval, the Ponder person, but just hearing you talk about Elves again just warms my heart, and I'm so excited to see it.
Yes. I still have Elves foiled out in my closet. I keep up with the deck. Every time Newton Hang posts some ridiculous sideboard card that he's innovated into the Elf shell, I get on tilt because I have to buy it in foil. Like when he put Snuff out in the deck, then he added Chalice to the Void to the deck for a while, and I was like, Newton, my family is starving. Please stop. I don't even play this deck anymore, but I'm going to keep up with it, whatever you post. Yeah, I am excited to talk about old Elves and old Elves theory, and all of that old Elves theory seems to apply to certain builds of Nadu today. And shout out to this player. I think his name's Edward. I don't have the names in front of me. I actually ran into him at dinner. I was like 30 minutes off site at a Korean barbecue, just waiting for my plane. And I ran into him and he's like, hey, I just won the Legacy for Art tournament. And he actually told me that he played one league to prep and then just added Natural Order based on vibes. He said his list isn't perfect, kind of a mess in places, but it was so powerful to just be flipping with Nadu, hit the Craterhoof and hard cast it is pretty trivial once you're flipping past multiple Cradles in a turn and just dumping creatures into play. Springheart and Tuco, really stupid with Craterhoof Behemoth. Reinventing the wheel here, but it's a wheel that needed to be reinvented if people were going to be playing Nadu Elves and doing it in the old style.
In second place in that event, we have Demir Froginator, which was the 7th from the Cup event. So shout outs to them on their dual top 8. We have Demir Tempo in 3rd, Nadu Breakfast, and Brian, I'll let you say the note on this one.
Yeah, I was just pulling these lists and the information from melee.gg. I was in both tournaments, so I have access to the tournament information at the end and stuff. This person named their deck 4C Loam in Melee. Like, Melee makes you choose a deck name out of their bank of deck names when you submit a deck. And that's for coverage purposes and data purposes later and everything. This person called their Nadu Breakfast deck 4C Loam. Don't be a tool. That's not funny. I'm out here trying to make a podcast and I'm like, oh, 4C Loam, that's cool. Click in. I'm like scouring the Nadu Breakfast list. I'm like, is there a Loam in here? Is this like a hybrid take on this? Is there something cool going on here? Nope, just someone being a doof.
Yeah, don't do that.
Off it. It's not funny. And after that, Demir Froginator. And then Red Stompy, played by one of my coaching clients, actually, who It appears to be, if not the Japan winning EW list, very close to it. It has the Lelias, the Vexing Baubles, and the Pyroglyphs. Green Cloud Post in 7th, and then our boy Jeremy in 8th with Sneak and Show, which I had met with Jeremy right before the event earlier that week, and he had been working on breakfast for a while, trying to make that work, wasn't really vibing with it, and he was like, you know what, I'm a Sneak and Show gamer at heart. I'm just going to send it one more time, see how it feels. Must feel good, man. And that's a big sign off on, we say it all the time on the pod, playing what you know is worth a lot, even if the metagame is a little weird for it. Just if you have the reps, if you understand the vibes and how the games move, when to shove, when to back off, all of that. And Jeremy was rewarded for years of experience playing Sneak and Show, which is, air quotes, not a deck right now. But guess what? He made top 8.
Just before we move too much further past it, I can't find the card right now, but there was a recently previewed card from MTG Foundations that is going to probably slot into the Elves style deck lists. It is, I think it's like a cat that has a landfall ability very similar to Bristly Bill. So when a land enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. If a second land enters, you instead double the number of +1/+1 counters on a creature. I think that is going to be legal for Eternal Weekend. So just be aware that that could be a thing that's coming.
Oh, okay. Maybe we're talking about different cards. I'm looking at a card right now. It's Dionys, Elvish Archdruid.
Yeah, we're talking about different things.
Okay. So, well, this one is from Foundation's Jumpstart. This is a Hill Giant, 4 mana, 3/3. Elves you control have, whenever this creature becomes tapped during your turn, untap it and put a +1 counter on it. This triggers once each turn. So basically, you activate Heritage Druid, the squad gets bigger, and they all untap. You basically get to refire all your mana elves once per turn. And if you are generating 4 mana or more on each iteration, with a Wirewood Symbiote, you could pick this up, put it back down, that resets the count, and you can fire it again. I don't know if this is going to slot into Legacy decks, but this is a very powerful effect once it's in play.
Scythe Cat Cub is the name of the card that I was looking for. 1 colorless and a green, 2/2 trample, and the ability was exactly what I said.
Cool. Yeah, so that's just like a non-legendary Bristly Bill with different flavor text.
All right. Any other standout things from this event that you all want to talk about?
I'm going to talk about my experience in this event playing Reanimator in the next segment, but a lot of Nadu. Nadu floating around the top tables. Nadu did well at Japan EW. Multiple different builds too. There's the Nadu Elves that won the tournament. Nadu Breakfast in both of the top 8s, in fact, played by different players. Don't sleep on Nadu. Know what's going on over there, and if you are that kind of gamer, maybe you just want to play it. I haven't ruled it out yet for Eternal Weekend myself, now that I know I'm not playing Reanimator.
3for1 Trading is one of Europe's leading Magic the Gathering traders. Their online shop has a fantastic selection of high-end Magic cards, especially for vintage, legacy, and old-school players. You can find them at shop.3for1trading.com or visit their booth at major events. They run weekly sales, and new, individually scanned high-end cards are added every Wednesday. Use code ETERNALGLORY to get our community-exclusive offer of free worldwide shipping on your first order over $500 and experience their world-class customer service and exact rating for yourself. All right, Brian, I'm going to set you up here. You had a pretty mediocre weekend with Reanimator, but the deck is supposed to be the best deck in the format. So give us some of your thoughts here. Maybe we'll talk about some data. Where do you want to begin?
Yeah, I'm going to start by talking about this. We have a matchup matrix that was provided by community members Valentine Menes and Anael Yahi. This is legacy matches scraped between late August and late October 2024. There are thousands of matches represented here, and shout out to those people for pulling this together. And what they've built is like I said, matchup matrix, I'm repeating myself, but it's a nice grid where you could be like Dimir Frog's win rate versus Painter and just find the spot in the matrix and see that Dimir Frog is 41.3% against Painter over a 63 match sample size. And we just have this big, cool grid, and they color coded it well to show basically the quality of a matchup. The better the matchup gets, the greener it gets, and the worse it gets, the redder it gets in the presentation. So you could very quickly kind of get a feel for what decks are good against what other decks. And this came up in a conversation I was having with Pokemoki when I was getting ready for Vegas. And the big thing that this matrix showed to me, or helped me understand, is that because the metagame is defined by Reanimator right now, the top decks are pretty strong versus Reanimator in terms of being able to hang. Very few decks have a positive record versus Reanimator, but it's close to 50% across the top of the metagame. Like Eldrazi, Dimir Frog, Painter, Red Prison are all... And Painter seems to be the best against Reanimator. Reanimator has like a 44% win rate versus Painter over the sample size. Mono Red's 48%. Dimir is 51% over the 48. That's close to a coin flip. Dimir is 51-49 versus Dimir Frog. Reanimator is 53.7% over Eldrazi. So we got a couple weighted coin flips across the top matchup spread. But then as we get into the other decks, Reanimator is 61% versus Nadu, 57 versus Doomsday, 67 versus Omnitel, 67.6 versus Grixis Frog, 60 versus Mystic Forge combo, and then versus all other decks that includes any deck with less than 2% meta share, it is 56.6% against the field of random shit. That's insane. Like, the top decks are the top decks because they can hang with Reanimator. And then once we leave this top 5 deck area, it's a shit show. Reanimator is just chewing up everything under that bracket. And that is, that's really interesting to me because that tells me if you want to play a top deck, you could probably hang. But if you're going to play some random bullshit, you're in a lot of trouble in the Reanimator meta.
Yeah, I really liked looking at the Death and Taxes row because Death and Taxes looks like it should be a good deck. About 54.7% versus Reanimator, about 55% versus Eldrazi, 69.2% versus a Dimir Frog deck list. But then you look at some of the other matchups, 20% versus Nadu, 28% versus Doomsday, 13 versus Omnitel, 15 versus Paradox Engine combo deck lists, only 47% against the field. Like, if you can, pick your pairings all day and only play against the absolute top of the metagame, like, yeah, that looks great. But some of those numbers are like, you get one wrong pairing and your tournament is over.
Yeah, and this is something I say all the time when I'm talking about preparing for a big event. You have to beat random nonsense. Like if you queue into the person who's on vacation and they're just playing Simic Merfolk today because that's the deck they have and they mostly just are here to hang out with their friends in Pittsburgh during Eternal Weekend, and you can't beat a Lord of Atlantis, it's over. But Reanimator is phenomenal against all that kind of mess down there in the back end of the metagame, where if you carefully tune your Death and Taxes list to beat the top 5 decks and then lose to Simic Merfolk, or the top 5 decks kind of moving target, you can't have a 20% win rate versus Nadu. You just can't. You cannot show up with that deck with the recent results that Nadu has been putting up. You're going to see Nadu in a 12-round tournament. So that is really important to understand. And Reanimator holding weighted coin flips across all the best decks and then just slaughtering everything else outside of that bracket, that's why this deck is busted right now. Not because it's unbeatable, but because the set of decks that can have a chance to beat it, it's close, and everyone else, it's not close.
I love looking at the actual data here because you'll be in conversations with people and they're like, oh, Eldrazi's really good because it's good against Reanimator. Yeah, I guess being good against Reanimator is a 46 win percentage. Like, if, you know what I mean? Like, you're still negative. Like, that is so crazy to me. And there's only 2 decks that are positive, and that's Death and Taxes and Painter. Like, why are we living in this world? I know that we're going back to stuff that we've talked about 2 months ago, but when they should have banned Grief in the announcement before, and then in the announcement where they banned Grief, that should have been the one for Psychic Frog, so that way we could have this Eternal Weekend for testing for the first big event. And instead we're playing what feels like a dead format, where, yes, we do have some new players in the metagame. I think the Esper Stoneblade deck is pretty exciting, but for the most part, this is the big thing for Dimir Reanimator this year. Like, this is the event that will be defined by the deck.
Yes, and I've said it a couple times already, but I want to hit it one more time because it's important. this is not a metagame where there are like 6 to 10 viable decks and they all interact with each other in ways that are interesting and like you win some, you lose some are positive, some are negative. This is a metagame where Reanimator is the deck and the other 4 or 5 top decks are only the 4 or 5 top decks because they have a coin flip versus Reanimator.
And in terms of like being honest with yourself in preparation for Eternal Weekend, if you are saying, I have a good matchup versus Blue-Black Reanimator, are you testing against someone who is as good as you or better than you? Or are you beating up on your locals who show up and play 3 rounds of Legacy every week, and thus you think you have a good matchup because you're winning your locals? I think it is very important to like put those asterisks on your testing, whatever that looks like, because the data is very clearly showing that very, very few decks have a positive matchup versus this deck.
I have a quick note here. So I collect all my own data just for my own testing purposes. Like, it's really just for me. And I'll say, oh, I am... there was a time period where I was actually 78% against Grixis Delver in the previous format. And they're like, yeah, but are you 78% versus, the best Grixis Delver player? To me, that doesn't matter. Because when I enter a large tournament, I am facing a range of quality of opponents, ranging from somebody who plays F&M Magic in round 3 to someone of Brian Coval's caliber in round 13. And you have to be able to beat one of them. Well, ideally you would beat both, but you're not going to face quality person in every single round. So if you can get by on the skin of your teeth in one of them and maybe dodge or lose one and have that be your one loss, I do think that is closer to acceptable, but you shouldn't be thinking, oh, I have to beat Brian Coval's every round, because I think that's just accepting defeat from the beginning.
Also, you do your testing on Magic Online almost exclusively, and the average Magic Online player in a Legacy League is better than the average FNM Legacy player by a lot. And just the quality of opponent you get when it's somebody who is even playing one league a week is so much more Legacy and so much more Magic than the person who has like maybe a monthly win a duel on a Saturday in their city. And a monthly win a duel in their city probably sounds amazing to people who live in rural environments or whatever, where there is no Legacy scene and they can't afford Magic Online or haven't jumped in yet or whatever the hangup is. They just talk to their friends and maybe listen to this podcast and then go play Eternal Weekend. And I will say, and no shade to anyone involved, walking around the Legacy Cup at MagicCon Vegas 123 player tournament, I saw some weird stuff going on. I saw some, here are people listening to podcasts, testing, doing all the work, where like, yeah, in the Reanimator mirror, there's a level system. You want to juke. You don't want monsters. You never want your monster to get reanimated by them. The best thing you can do is cut your Entomb package. Then you get to get your Force of Wills, and then you're in this level system. I saw people just game 2 Reanimator mirror, turn 1 Entomb, game on. Okay, here we go. They either don't know that, don't understand the nuance to it, or they're just on some other level where they know you cut your forces and your monsters, and they're just gonna fucking send it on you and hope it works. And it's especially in a metagame where the number 1 deck has a transformational sideboard, you're going to get a wide range of people doing weird stuff.
Well, Brian, do you have any thoughts specifically about the deck? Like you played it, you got bullied while playing it. Do you want to go in any deeper here? Yes.
First off, I want to shout out Andreas Peterson, Iko Baronin. He and I have been doing some playoff series where we did a vintage one and we did a legacy one where we play basically the top decks in the formats. And we just released a video last week or this week where he played Reanimator 4 times and I played Eldrazi, Dimir Tempo, Red Stompy, and the Reanimator Mirror against him, playing Reanimator on all 4 games. I beat him with every deck except the Mirror. And if we want to talk about good testing partners, Andreas is one of the strongest Eternal players on the planet, and I beat him with dumb Ancient Tomb decks that I don't know how to play. I don't know how to mulligan. I don't know how to sideboard with those. Like, I just did my best in the moment, and I beat one of the strongest players on Earth playing the best deck in the format with every deck except the Mirror. And that speaks to this metagame where the top decks all exist because they can flip coins with Reanimator. That said, my experience from Vegas is, number one, people are ready. Nobody was surprised. There was no moment of like, oh, damn, there's an Entomb in your tempo deck. Like, everybody knows. So that's gone. The mirror is kind of a crapshoot. And I was just talking about this a little bit where the level system, if you know what your air quote's supposed to do, then that's one game. If you both know what you're supposed to do and you know that what you're not supposed to do beats what you're supposed to do, that's another level to the game. If somebody copied the deck off Goldfish and doesn't play a lot of Legacy, they don't know what they're supposed to do. So they're kind of starting on level 2, which is awkward for everyone who's on level 1. And there's this whole moving target. And even if you do know what to do, there's partial jukes where you leave in 2 Entombs in your Archon. And then there's complete jukes where you have nothing. And then there's you think I'm going to juke, so I'm not. And you're going to have to beat full combo Reanimator without Force of Wills in your deck. And there's this whole thing going on. But I have found that the power level of Reanimate and Metamorphosis Fanatic make it really hard to sculpt a game plan, even if you do understand what's going on better than your opponent. Because you can line up this, I have Fairy Macabre, I have a Barrogoyf to mop up afterwards, I have a Daze if they go for too many. Like, you can do like the thing that you do in Legacy and try to plan 3-4 turns ahead. And then your opponent can brainstorm into Thoughtseize Reanimate. And then they strip your Macabre, and then they have a Troll in play, and your whole hand full of Barrogoyf and Daze is garbage. And just the power level swings. I basically spent that entire tournament versus all opponents just hoping the top card of my deck was Metamorphosis Fanatic at all times. And it frequently wasn't that card.
So something that I think is very interesting about the blue-black Reanimator deck is that even if you don't know how you are supposed to approach a matchup in the post-sideboard games, your deck is still strong enough and your plan is still good enough and diverse enough that sometimes that deck will still just carry you.
One thing that I found playing online is that I'll have, you get paired into an unknown opponent. They have no Goldfish history. You're just in the dark. They mulligan to 4. That used to be a sign of someone's on like a turn 1 combo deck. Now they're the tempo deck because a mulligan to 4 just might be land, Entomb, Reanimate, and Daze. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, they're low on resources. They're not with Atraxa in their deck. That is a brand new hand. And I've lost to mulligans to 4 where like your opponent just goes turn 1 Polluted Delta go and step Entomb. And it feels so bad. Like, it is crippling the amount of like anxiety that you get. You're just like, oh, I just lost to a mulligan to 4. And then there's the draws where they keep 7. Like, that's not even you know what I mean? Like, there's 7 card hands that just do that. And you're like, oh, I was never in this game. Not even close. And it's not just Storm combo, because I play different decks on my channel, and you're just so far behind from the get-go, and you might not even realize it. Like, that's how powerful this Reanimator deck truly is.
Right. And that brings me to one of my other anecdotal reporting from playing the deck in Vegas. Decks that can absorb a 4-card deficit actually seem fine against Reanimator. Like, I played against a 5-color Yorion Beanstalk deck, piloted by a nice dude from Italy, and he just had like turn 2 Beanstalk in both of our games, and then I spend 2 cards to Entomb Reanimate Atraxa, just plows it with the trigger on the stack. I look at 10 cards, I put 3 to 5 of them in my hand, depending on how lucky I am, and then he's just like, yeah, that's fine. Or like one of the games, I solituded a monster, drew a card, played a second Beanstalk, grabbed Yorion. In our game 2, I pinned him with a Harbinger of the Seas, just off the top rope when he was at 4 life, and he was just like, yeah, that's fine. Had like 5 cards in hand, exclusively non-basic lands. It just didn't matter. He just bought Yorion, cast it, flickered, both Beanstalks, drew 4 cards off just islands off the Harbinger. After the game, he's like, yeah, I had Force, I just didn't care about that. Like, it really, you really feel it when you spend 2 cards, whether it's Cycle Troll, then cast Reanimate, or Entomb plus Reanimate. Put something into play, and then it gets answered cleanly by a Swords to Plowshares or a Solitude or whatever it is. And that's how I kept finding myself in situations where it's like, boy, I hope the top of my deck is Metamorphosis Fanatic, because I just lost everything. And if it's not backed by Force, or if they win the counter war after you've spent a Force, you're really just sitting there with, nothing going on. The deck is pretty anemic if it's not slamming its thing. And that brings me to my kind of overarching theory question about Reanimator, where obviously this deck is very good. The whole metagame is built around it, and it is out of bounds in a variety of ways, including its current reported win rate, and I do expect things to get banned out of this. But I wonder if it's a deck that an individual person can plan to navigate one important event with, or is this just such a powerful deck that the overall average of every person playing it strong at the game or who just picked it up for the weekend, it's averaging out to a high win rate because the deck is just so powerful? But can one person show up with, like, let's say you make every decision perfectly and you've done the testing and you are just a super genius. Is there enough agency in this deck that you can navigate a field that's ready for it on the day that it matters most? Or is this just sometimes you flip the Fanatic, sometimes you don't? Sometimes you keep 7, sometimes you mull to 4. And does that matter? Is it all just average over time? Or obviously better players win more. So there is something to that, but I don't know. Maybe I'm rambling. Maybe this doesn't make sense. But a powerful deck with low agency does not make a good tournament deck to me, because I think I will make small decisions better than my opponents on average. And I wonder if putting all my eggs in a Reanimate basket is wasting the agency that, I've earned through my reps over the years.
Today's video is also sponsored by Gold Sabertooth, who is a friend of every member of this pod, and he does absolutely fantastic artwork. He is running a Kickstarter called the Commander Pantheon, which includes 9 bold and colorful playmats featuring iconic commanders such as Najila, and even more are going to be unlocked via stretch goals of this Kickstarter. There are CEDH-centric sticker collections as well, featuring people like Tivit and Timna. And you can support this Kickstarter in a way that gets you 1, 2, 4, or even all 9 playmats with different bundle deals. I own a decent amount of Gold Sabertooth stuff. I absolutely love his tokens, and I think you would enjoy his art as well. If you're looking for this, search up Gold Sabertooth : the Commander Pantheon on Kickstarter.com. All right, so for our final section of the pod today, we want to talk about bannings. And I believe that most people who are very active in Legacy believe that Psychic Frog is going to receive a ban on, I believe it is December 16th. But as a podcast, we are beginning to wonder, is Psychic Frog going to be enough to knock this blue-black deck back into bounds with the acceptable power level of the format? Or are we going to need to look at more stuff? Because we're playing whack-a-mole with this deck right now. We knocked Grief out of it, and it was still the best deck. If we knock Psychic Frog out of it, is it still the best deck, just in a slightly different form?
Right. It's pretty awkward, and Brian already mentioned it in the previous section a little bit. We all knew Grief needed to go 3 months before it did. And the 3-month window where Grief was legal when it pretty universally shouldn't have been was when Psychic Frog was introduced. And that 3-month window is the one that we all wish we had spent finding out that Psychic Frog is over the line so we could have a healthy format for Eternal Weekend. That ship has sailed. That song is sung. We've heard that part before. However, what does the shell look like without Grief or Psychic Frog? If Frog gets banned in December and the slots that are currently Psychic Frog in the deck just become Orcish Bowmaster or whatever, just put some other reasonable Legacy tempo creature in that slot, how good is the Dimir tempo Reanimator deck? Are we at a critical mass where this is just out of bounds in some fundamental way? Hitting a card like Grief or a new tool like Psychic Frog will not collapse it? Or what is going on in this deck? I guess a good way to ask this is, what is going on in this deck that was not going on in traditional combo Reanimator back in the day? We've had blue-black Reanimator in the past in Legacy. Black-red Reanimator was a top deck for a while, and nobody serious anyway, someone always wants something, but nobody serious was saying this deck needs to be banned. Something needs to happen to get this into line. It was just like, yeah, make sure to pack your surgicals if that's going to be something you expect in your meta. But what's going on now where surgical extraction is too slow to fight this and blue decks are playing Fairy Macabre?
So I recorded a video about 2 weeks ago where in the middle of it, I was talking about how you could look at Entomb. And my comment section was very angry, but also there were some people that agreed with me. And one of the things about it is that you get to play a suite of targetable creatures that are all singletons. So you can play Gristlebrand, you can play Atroxagrand Unifier. You obviously have your Troll of Khazad-dûm package that you just cycle to the graveyard. You're not entombing for those. But there's the new Vagagoth creature that's like a Leyline to the Void that's a 9/9. There's a whole collection of creatures you can play, and you get to pick your favorite one for whatever situation. And that's not even mentioning Archon of Cruelty. So there's creatures that have been power crept since the introduction of Black-Red Reanimator. Back in 2014 when the Faithless Looting build started taking off, and I believe it was Grand Prix Louisville where it took second place. And back then they were playing like Sire of Insanity. And I'm blanking on the name, but the angel that you reveal at the beginning of the game in Taxes.
Chancellor of the Annex.
There we go. So instead of playing Chancellor of the Annex and Sire of Insanity, you now have Archon of Cruelty and Atraxa. So the power level of these creatures has gone up dramatically. And if you look at some of the language that Wizards of the Coast has used during bannings, and let's look at Survival of the Fittest here. They talked about not wanting to keep Survival of the Fittest in mind when they print creatures, because for the rest of time, Survival of the Fittest will get better as creatures get better. Meanwhile, Entomb has remained legal in Legacy this whole time. And over the last decade or so, we've received creatures that are just blow my mind with how good they are compared to what we used to have. Like, I remember growing up reanimating Achromas, and now we have Gristlebrand and Atraxa and all these other things. So just because something has been legal forever doesn't mean that it can't be over the line now when it wasn't 10 years ago, which was one of the biggest comments on my video. They're like, well, it was never a problem before Psychic Frog. It's like, well, sure, Psychic Frog is a problem, but so is Atraxa and Vagagoth and all these other things that have been printed in the last handful of years.
And I want to point out something important for people without the longer scope of memory here. Entomb was not here forever. It was banned in the early days of Legacy. It got unbanned, I think it was 2010, and Blue-Black Reanimator immediately won a Legacy Grand Prix that year, right after Entomb got unbanned. And the dominance of that deck led to the banning of Mystical Tutor. That's how they decided to get Blue-Black Reanimator back in line. They decided that Mystical Tutor was probably more out of bounds than Entomb was, and something had to go from the shell. Entomb was not always here, and it was not always okay. Let's start by framing that. It's been okay for the last 13 or so years, but we're starting to enter a place where, like Brian said, the survival problem. They also use that language when they banned Eye of Ugin in Modern. Rather than think about every Eldrazi for the rest of time, they'll just ban Eye of Ugin to hit them all. Like, this is a steady theme in things that have been banned in the past, and Entomb being a proper tutor rather than just like Sneak and Show, where the first A and B you assemble you have to go with. Maybe you'd rather have Grizzlebrand on this board state. Maybe you'd rather have Emrakul. Maybe you wish you could thread it all together with an Omniscience in the middle, but when you're ready to go, you got to hit the button, which is not how Entomb works.
And when you look at Sneak and Show versus Reanimator, the Reanimator's deck package is so much smaller. Like, when you look at Dimir Reanimator, the way that it's constructed right now, you have your 4 Reanimates, 4, Animate Deads or whatever, your Entombs, and then you play a couple targets. Like, it's really only a few. It's like 3 in some lists. Like, some lists even get away with 2. So you're looking at 11, maybe 12 slots total. But when you look at Sneak and Show, 4 Show and Tell, 4 Sneak Attack, 4 Atraxa, Emrakul, Gristlebrand, Omniscience, it's a third of your deck or more. Like, the amount of cards you have to play to support Sneak and Show in comparison to Reanimator is just drastically different, and they're able to do it while having selection. And Tomb is just such a powerful card, and I think that people that just think, well, it's been here for the last decade, aren't really looking at the full scope.
Another thing that's going on here is it's easier than ever for decks to just win the game with a singular card. So a Psychic Frog can just win you the game. A Barrogoyf can just win you the game. And especially with push summer sets like the Modern Horizon sets, there are going to just be more individually strong cards that can be cast on maybe 2 mana or cast off a dark ritual that can just take over and win a game. And this shell can just very, very easily absorb whatever the best, most broken creatures are at any given time, while supplementing it with this Entomb Reanimate package.
So I am not calling for Entomb to be banned here. I don't think that's actually the problem. I do agree with everything we just said, and the historical record will show that Entomb has been out of bounds in the past. But I think the big structural difference that it is changing right now, like Brian, what you just said about sometimes it's like a 6-card package, the 4 Entombs and the 2 monsters that you get, and then otherwise you're just playing Delver, is pretty crazy. Like that's a big departure from a Sneak and Show deck that needs to dedicate a third of the deck. But we also look at Black Red Reanimator that had 10 or 12 reanimate monsters because Faithless Looting was one of your Entombs. You had to have one in your hand when you looted, or else you just went down a card for no real gain. There had to be a critical mass there. But I think the card that really makes it so you can play fair Magic in these shells is Troll of Khazad-dûm. These decks are cheating on their land count. They're playing 15 or 16 lands. 3 or 4 of those lands are wasteland, and somehow they're still just functioning just fine. Delver decks used to play 18 lands. They pushed up to 19 in recent years. It was up to 20 when they had to play with like expressive iteration and they were planning for a longer game. Now they're on 16, 15 lands, and Reanimate is always on. Reanimate is almost never a dead card because your mana base turns on Reanimate. And that is something that was never happening in the past. And just it smooths out the fail rate of so many things. They get to turn on Reanimate for free while playing lower lands and having perfect mana. And the Troll also just lets you play Harbinger of the Seas. Now you have a Blood Moon in your deck because you can tutor your basic swamp at your leisure, while also, like I said, turning on Reanimate. And even something like cycling Troll on turn 1, even if you don't have the Reanimate ready, is still in the graveyard. You'll draw one eventually. You'll flip that Metamorphosis Fanatic eventually. And the thing that you were just going to do anyway, because you kept your hand on the strength of having access to this colored mana, leaves this insane object in the graveyard. Like if Troll of Khazad-dûm didn't have Super Menace, if it was just a 6/5 vanilla that cycled for a swamp, I don't think these decks would be as good. They might still be playable. We might still be doing this, but the fact that it's a functionally unblockable thing that gets the game done in 3 hits, that is, I think, really the structural thing that's changing it. And piggybacking on that, Metamorphosis Fanatic, we were all excited about Triumph of St. Catherine 2 years ago when that card came into print. Or a year and a half ago, not even that long ago. We're like, wow, this is a lot of stats with Lifelink for just 2 mana. And Metamorphosis Fanatic is almost as many stats. But if your opponent doesn't have graveyard hate, it's way completely more than Triumph of St. Catherine could ever hope to be. And the more kind of middle of the road I'm going off, or I'm playing fair objects like Troll of Khazad-dûm, fixing your lands even if you don't have a Reanimate, Fanatic flipping off as a 2-mana 4/4 even if you don't have a graveyard, the more stuff like that you could just tuck 4 Entombs and 2 monsters into a shell with, the more dangerous the Reanimate deck becomes.
And on top of everything you said, Troll also lets you cantrip off of a wasteland start. And sometimes when you're playing against an opposing deck, you might not want to expose something like your first Underground Sea to a wasteland. So you just like play your own wasteland that you might not care about, cycle, get a basic or get a secondary blue source, and you are off to the races while dodging some turn 1 stuff. It's a cantrip that works through Chalice of the Void if people are still playing that. The Troll is doing way more heavy lifting than it gets credit for.
I do agree. However, Troll of Khazad-dûm, if I'm the one at Wizards making decisions or making recommendations to Wizards of the Coast, it feels like a card that just can't or shouldn't be banned. Like, I agree with you that it's a glue card, and it makes a lot of sense. You're not saying anything that isn't true, but if you knock out Troll, I don't know if it actually makes a dent in the deck. Like, I think Brian's point is that there's been a critical mass of cards that have been printed that all have warped this deck into a powerful machine, and I don't think if you hit Fanatic or Troll, the machine stops. If you hit Entomb, the machine takes a hit, and instead of being S tier, it's probably low A. And I think that's what I'm okay with. If I'm at Wizards and I'm looking to make a change that isn't going to kill a deck, but keep it alive and people that invested into Underground Seas can stay happy, to me it's Entomb. But ultimately, I'm not giving Wizards advice or making suggestions for them. It's just, I think it's the thing that keeps the deck alive without killing it. And that's what a lot of their ban philosophy is about.
I agree with your reasoning. I don't agree with your conclusion because I think Entomb being banned does actually kill Reanimator. It's just gone. The other ways to get a monster into the graveyard are so embarrassing that I think Reanimator is just in the Shadow Realm if it loses Entomb. I could apply your argument to Reanimate and be convinced if you have the 1 mana way to dump a monster, but not a 1 mana way to get it back. If we have to play Animate Dead, where like Disenchant and Consign to Memory become answers to a Reanimate start, that like Brazen Borrower, even like I'm on the play, you Entomb, you Animate Dead, I borrow the Animate in response to the return trigger. Now we're tempo gaming back and forth, and I know you have the Animate Dead. That could be interesting. I think killing Reanimate slows down the deck without killing it. I think taking Entomb kills the deck.
So just kind of putting it into words for our audience, is banning Psychic Frog enough to get the Reanimator deck in line, in your opinion?
I think no.
I think no.
I also think no.